Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. My name's Mark DeVoe.
And I'm Mark State. And as always, a huge thank you to the good people who keep this show on the road. That's our patrons over on Patreon and our academates on the Bestseller Academy. We've got three patrons this week. We've got Rebecca McFarland, Fiona Scott, and Carol Owen. Everyone budge up at the back of the bus and make more room. Thank you, Rebecca, Fiona, and Carol. What do you get if you support this podcast? Well, if you go over to Patreon and become a chart topper supporter, you get access to over 130 deep dive episodes. And some of those recent episodes, we've had them on police procedurals. We've had them on forensics. We've had them on search engine optimization. We've had them on marketing. We've had them on Paul Austin Ardoin recently talking about how to earn $1,000 a month as an independent author. It's just amazing stuff. You won't regret it. And on the Academy, you get me and Mr. D as your tutors. You get one-to-one sessions, you get weekly surgeries, we get craft coaching, life coaching, tons of great courses, the whole shebang. So pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com/support to discover how to support the podcast. And the Academy, what's the Academy website, Mr. D?
It's academy.bestsellerexperiment.com.
Links in the show notes.
Fantastic stuff. Brilliant. How have you been doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm still in first draft land, but I'm just at that tipping point as I go into the final act. And what I start doing with this, I just take a moment to write down where all my characters are at that moment and just to remind myself what the hell they've been up to for the last 70,000 words. And I'm about to push them over the edge into the third act. So having lots of fun, making the lives of my characters miserable. How about you, Mr. D? How's it been going?
Well, I've got a title for a new holiday book called Camping with COVID.
Oh God, no!
I know. I have finally had a week off. These are a rarity in my life, but finally had a week off. We went to our favourite campsite by a beautiful river. Picture the scene, Mark. Kids splashing
idyllic.
in the water.
Yeah, lovely.
Smell of bacon frying in the background. It's just perfect. And then the sore throat. And I'm like, this isn't good. And my girlfriend got the sore throat as well. And then we didn't realise this, but for the whole of the camping trip, we both basically had COVID, which we should have really worked out because we both decided to do that crazy thing. We dared each other to dive into the river at 8 a.m. in the morning. And this isn't, okay, just put this in perspective. We're talking British Columbia. These rivers are coming from snow-capped mountains, beautiful, like the water is sparkling beautiful.
Crystal clear, yeah.
My God, is it cold?
Nippy.
Okay, anyone out there in podcast listener land who does that thing where they do that, what they call it, the polar swim, or they go out like every morning and they dive into the ocean regard. I have so much respect for you. It is just incredible. I mean, my gosh, I was that kid who I don't know what it is, but just never did well with cold water. I'm the kid that used to kind of skirt around the swimming pool, leisure centre for 20 minutes, dip my foot in. But no, this time I was all in. I was just like, right, walk in straight, no messing about. But my gosh, that probably didn't help, did it? We had COVID. We didn't realise we had COVID. So, yeah. But the great thing is, we're better to open your notepad where you can't really do anything anyway because you're not feeling great. But I got this little hammock set up, Mark. Oh,
nice. Essential.
It's the best. I had so many comments, people walking past our little campsite going, I need one of those. All the blokes, actually, I need one of those. I need that. And I literally spent the whole week suspended in swinging motion. I had my notepad and I wrote like about 80 pages of notes for this non-fiction experiment that I'm almost going to commit to, not quite. But yes, all flowing. It's fascinating. And what I've realised, this is I'm going to make all kinds of connections now with non-fiction and fiction, but I'm in the world building stage of a non-fiction series potentially.
Okay.
Because I've started to look at it and thinking, now that's these are 2, 3, now it's 4 books. I can't do all that in one. And I'm starting to look at it. I know it's mental. Now I do know everyone's shouting, yeah, right, procrastination. He's in world building stages, another. But I suddenly realized that why don't we take this concept of world building from the fiction world and use it for non-fiction? Because as we know, write a series, and so many non-fiction books are just standalones. So many of them, right? So I've got this rather large concept happening at the moment.
This is the Mark Devoe life coaching literary universe.
It kind of is, yeah.
Like it.
You knew it was going to happen, but I'm genuinely excited about it because things all seem to start. It's all based around a big diagram, a flowchart, weirdly enough. And we're going to be talking about organisation, aren't we, in this, interview coming up? But I've got this big flowchart that was just mapping my ideas out. And then I started going, that book one is those top three. Book two is the next three boxes. And it's working. It's like, for my mind anyway, at least, it's kind of like making sense. So I'm excited. So I will be putting something on the BXP team this week to say, okay, what do you think? Am I mad? But this could be...
we all know that.
Well, yeah, exactly. But,
don't put that up.
So I'll report back and let you know how it's going.
Exciting stuff.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. So as we mentioned, talking about organisation, we have a very interesting mix of different things today on today's interview, don't we?
Oh, this is fantastic interview. I had great fun talking to Antony Johnston, who is a New York Times bestselling author and creator of Atomic Blonde, which is the comic book that was originally published as The Coldest City, that was adapted into the movie starring Charlize Theron. And for more than 20 years, he's written books, graphic novels, video games, film, and more. And now he's back with something a bit different. The Dog Sitter Detective. Look, I've got a copy here, which is the first of a cozy crime series featuring Gwinny Tuffel, a retired actress who takes up dog sitting to make ends meet, but discovers she also has a knack for solving murders. And we discuss what Antony learned from writing comics, how he was inspired by the likes of David Bowie and Neil Gaiman, and how he wrote the book on being an organised writer.
Brilliant. So let's dive in and listen to the multi-talented Antony Johnston chatting with Mark.
Antony Johnston, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Absolute tickety-boo, thank you. And all the better for having dipped into The Dog Sitter Detective, this absolutely wonderful novel. What I love about this, folks, if you go to the website, this is where Antony knows his readers. If you go to the website, it gives you the blurb, tells you what happens, but at the bottom it says, P.S. Nothing bad happens to the dogs. Now, there's an author who knows his readers. Antony, tell us about The Dog Sitter Detective.
Yeah, well, The Dog Sitter Detective, as you say, is a book which features dogs in which nothing bad happens to them. That's very important to me as a reader. I am one of these people who, if I'm reading something that involves animals and the animals start getting maimed and injured and stuff, I can't do it. So more broadly, it is a cozy crime book, the first in a series, featuring Gwinny Tuffel, a retired actress who she retired to look after her father because he was ill. 10 years later, he's now passed away, and she realizes that there's no money. She has a house, but no actual funds. And so she decides that she's going to have to try and resume her acting career at the ripe old age of 60, which obviously is not the easiest task in the world. Before then, however, she has a wedding to attend to. Her best friend, who's also an actress, much more successful and wealthy actress, is marrying a Italian business magnate at her friend Tina at Tina's country house in Heyburnstead in Hertfordshire. And Gwinny goes to the wedding, feels a little sort of fish out of water. She hasn't been socializing much for the last 10 years, but things are starting to go okay until suddenly there is a terrible scream, and it turns out that the groom has been murdered. And Tina, Gwinny's friend, has been accused of the murder. So now it's up to her to uncover the real culprit and prove that her friend's innocence. And she has to do this while looking after a very expensive wedding gift of a pair of purebred Saluki dogs. So that's where the dogs come into it. And she's looking after them throughout the whole of the book while investigating this murder at the wedding.
It's a brilliant setup. And each book in the series, I believe, is going to feature a different breed. So
that's correct, yeah. I set myself a challenge, basically, because I started with sighthounds because I'm a sighthound owner.
Right.
I love sighthounds. I know a lot about them. I owned them for 15 years or more. Absolutely love them. So that was a fairly easy one for me to do. I didn't have to do a lot of research, But I'm a lifelong dog lover anyway. I mean, I grew up with a border collie in the family, for example. All my extended family had dogs of various different breeds and what have you. So I thought it would just be interesting and, like I say, a bit of a challenge for myself if every book features a different breed for Gwinny to dog sit for, while she, of course, is also stumbling across murders.
You do know this is going to cause all sorts. You're going to start getting requests. You know that, don't you?
I've already had them. I mean, they're already coming in.
Excellent stuff. Now, the other big challenge here is you're writing a whodunit. And, you've written spy thrillers, you've written supernatural stories, you've written Resident Evil, amongst other things. But a whodunit, that kind of cozy crime whodunit, is very much a genre of itself. There are reader expectations. How aware of you were of the genre when you went into this, and what were the big surprises in writing this? What were the biggest lessons learned?
I was very aware of it because although cozy crime as a specific subgenre is not something I'd written before, I'm a lifelong reader and lover of sort of puzzle-focused mysteries and mysteries in general. I mean, everything I write is a mystery, really, regardless of what genre or format it's in. Even Atomic Blonde is basically just a big, long mystery. Yeah. I even managed to, get a sort of a police procedural style murder mystery into a Marvel superhero book at one point back about 10 years ago or so. I always write mysteries. My spy thrillers are mysteries as well. So the mystery aspect was an easy one. And as I say, although I hadn't written cozy crime before, I have read plenty of it. I grew up reading, children's mysteries like The Famous Five and the Three Investigators series from America, stuff like that. So, the Sherlock Holmes, what were they called? The Baker Street Irregular series.
Yes.
So books like that. And then graduated to things like Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie and what have you as I got older. So, and I love watching mystery shows on TV, movies, crime and mystery movies and what have you. So, like I say, as a consumer, I was very aware of the genre and its tropes and conventions and all that sort of thing. Some of which I follow in The Dog's a Detective, and some of which I deliberately, sort of skirt around and try to subvert or break or whatever. But yeah, it was a challenge, and I did learn a lot writing that first one. Obviously, you always do when you're writing something that you haven't done before. But also, again, it is still a mystery, and it is still something where you have to just kind of assemble the component parts of the puzzle, and that is something that I'm quite used to doing. So the main element in this book that doesn't feature in a lot of my work is the humor.
Right.
And that was actually a lot of very hard work because writing humor doesn't come naturally to me. I have to work very hard at it. But the problem is when you work hard at humor, if people can see you've worked hard at it, it's not funny anymore.
Exactly. You can't force it, can you?
So then you have to work even harder to make it look as if you haven't worked very hard at it. It's a rod for my own back and all that. But it was worth it, I think, because that is really part of the genre. The sort of the gentleness, the humor, sort of a light touch, I think is very important to a good cozy. It's certainly what I enjoy when I'm reading or watching a good cozy myself. So, like I say, that's the part really where I had to kind of fully step outside of my comfort zone because I'm just not used to doing that so much. Yeah, but I think I pulled it off, and I had a lot of fun doing it.
No, you absolutely did. What's the phrase? Dying is easy, comedy is hard.
Exactly.
Tell us about Gwinny as well. She's a terrific invention, and I would imagine when creating a character like this, the temptation is to make them young and sparky and, aim for that, maybe that YA market or even that 30s, market. You've made a decision to put her in her 60s, which I think is a terrific decision. She's someone who's maybe her career is behind her, maybe thinks her best days are behind her, but she's got a really sharp mind. She's a puzzle solver. Tell us where Gwynny came from.
All of that is absolutely true. There is obviously a temptation to do that sort of thing. My spy thrillers, the Bridget Sharp books, feature a young woman for exactly that reason, because it's interesting. There's a lot of room to grow, all that sort of stuff, and obviously you hope that it will appeal to a slightly younger audience as well. But with this book, for one thing, let's face it, the audience for cozies is mostly, not exclusively, but mostly the older reader. So there's that. But there's also, frankly, there is a lack of representation of older women in fiction. I mean, crime fiction is actually better than most genres for representation of all kinds, and continues to get better. But still, older women are pretty thin on the ground. There's not that many of them. So there was that. element. There were also story and plot elements where it would fit for somebody to be older in that position. I needed somebody who has enough life experience that they can have been, much like Miss Marple, can have been an observer of human nature, that sort of thing. And also I needed somebody, obviously, who had a lot of experience with dogs to show that she's very good with them and knows how to handle them. So it was a whole bunch of different factors that came together to make that decision. But as I say, partly it was, maybe even primarily, it was just thinking, well, there's not a lot of them around. So and I've always tried to sort of help with, do what I can to help increase representation in any genre or format that I work in. So I thought, well, yeah, why not? It fits story-wise, but I think it would also be interesting. And it gives one an interesting perspective. I mean, you mentioned that she's worried that that her best days are behind her and it's going to be very difficult to restart her career. Now, I think all of us who reach a certain age kind of... Yep. Can have a tendency to feel that way. We would get here and think, oh my God, have I done my best work? Is this it? Is it all downhill from here? I think that's something that a lot of people, once we pass 40, 50 years old, can relate to. So there was that as well. It was I thought that was something that would be interesting to put in there as a character element throughout the series that people, as I say, could relate to in a very universal way.
Brilliant. It's a great choice. Well, let's go back to your youth, Antony. Let's go way back.
I wish I could.
Now, you started out as a graphic designer, but that kind of, you pivoted into comics and comic books. Tell us about how that life changed for you and how that came about.
So this is such a cliche, but it's absolutely true. I've always been a storyteller. I've always written my own stories. I've always made my own stories up. I read comics from a very, very young age and started reading books as soon as I sort of could graduate from comics to books, but continued reading comics as well. I've always, as I say, made up my own stories, but frankly, I come from, a working class family in a working class town in the Midlands, and I did not know anybody who worked in a creative field. It wasn't a career option that had ever really been presented to me. The one exception was my English teacher in high school had a book published. He had a novel published when I was in his class at high school. And that was one of the most exciting things that had ever, as far as I was concerned, that had ever happened in school. But like I say, it wasn't something, there was no path. I couldn't see a way to get there. Graphic design, however, especially as I was coming up just as computers were starting to take over design. Not quite. I did learn, all the sort of traditional methods of a paste up, as we call it, laying things out by hand and what have you. But Macs were starting to, and I've been using a Mac since 1988.
Right.
My high school got one, and I produced 2 school magazines on it. And that was I think that was the beginning of the end, because then I immediately wanted to carry on making magazines using this incredible digital tool. So yeah, that was a prior career that I genuinely loved, and I still keep my hand in with graphic design. I do a lot of branding and graphics for the Crime Writers Association, for example.
Right.
I do show art for podcasts and things like that, just as a hobby, as a kind of, like I say, to keep my hand in. But I always wanted to be a writer. There's no question about that. And I was doing that in my spare time while I was a graphic designer, both at agencies and then at publishers working on magazines. And like I say, I'd read comics my whole life. I, again, didn't really see a path to working in them until suddenly I did. That actually came about through a book that I reviewed for a friend while I was working at .NET magazine at Future Publishing, a book called Writers on Comics Script Writing, published by Titan Books, I believe.
Yeah.
Which interviewed a whole bunch of comics writers, both American and British, some of whom were people I had read when I was a kid in 2000 AD, like, Garth Ennis and people like that. And it just kind of reminded me, oh yeah, actually, yeah, there are people who write these things, and it is possible to sort of get into it. And so I did. I just kind of set my mind to it, and for the next few years, I just butted my head against the wall of comics and graphic novels to break into that industry, and managed it. I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and start getting published, and that was my career then for the next 15 odd years.
And it's folks, I'll put a link in the show notes to Antony's wiki entry. The comics, it's an astonishing roster of comics, everyone's favorite comics. It's just amazing. You must have learned so much about storytelling in that period as well. Was that kind of your writing school?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as I say, I'd always been writing in my spare time, even before I kind of became a professional. But absolutely, yes, when you have to deliver on deadline every month, and you've got these ongoing comics, you need a new issue, it's got to be written.
Yeah.
You learn very, very quickly how to put, the basics of how to put a story together. And I mean, as with any writer, I look back at some of those older comics now and I think, oh, there's things I would have done differently. I could have done this better and what have you. But I'm still pretty proud of most of the work I did. And I'm a fairly fast learner. And I had to learn very fast in order to sustain a career, because I went full-time freelance in 2002. And by that point, I'd only been a published comics writer for about 18 months. I'd been a professional writer in my spare time for a few years, doing writing like independent role-playing games and writing magazine articles about role-playing games and stuff. But I'd only been a comics writer, for about a year and a half. And then I was laid off. The magazine I was working on got closed down. So I took my severance and thought, well, stick that in the bank for a few months and see if I can give this comics lark a go. And as I say, again, right place, right time. As it happened, I did. And suddenly here I am. It's all gone by in a blur 20 odd years later.
Well, let's not rush it. Because in the middle of all that comics mayhem, you wrote a novel. I think, is it your debut novel, Frightening Curves?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that? Because there's not a lot about this online. It's all I can see is about someone called Phil London. He's a government agent. He's a psychic, and it came out 2001. Tell us about Frightening Curves.
This is the thing when people think that obviously I started writing novels just a few years ago, but actually my first published fiction was a novel or kind of an extended novella.
Right.
Frightening Curves is in that kind of, it's a short novel, it's a long novella, depending on your definitions, and it's illustrated as well. And that came about because I was, again, just happened to be in the right sort of time when webcomics were first becoming a thing that people would read. And so my first ever comics, like non-professional comics work, was done on the web. I would write short comic strips, and artists that I'd met online would draw them, and we'd put them up on various websites and stuff. And Frightening Curve started out in that way. It was a serialized, illustrated story,
right,
which appeared weekly on now it was either op8.com or Reactor magazine, but I think they were both run by the same person, which is a guy called Chad Ward, who's a film director now. And it was serialized as I wrote about 1,000 words of text every week. Arman Chowdhury, an illustrator and painter who works in Los Angeles, he did digital paintings to accompany each of those 1,000-word chapters every week, and that's how it would be published. And then we got through. And it was very popular. That was the other thing that surprised everyone, I think, was it rapidly became the most popular thing on the website. And so we finished part one. We got to the end of part one and we were very, very tired doing that weekly, believe me. We were very tired and we said, we'll take a break now. And then, as it happened, somebody else that we both knew from the online comics community was putting together a independent small press. And he basically approached us. Scott Brown, his name is. He approached us and said, if you finish this, I'll publish it as our first book.
Wow. Which
is crazy. It's a strange format. It's full color, which is really expensive to print.
Yeah.
Just what a bizarre thing to do. But anyway, so we did. So I revised it slightly so that it wasn't quite so rigidly 1,000 words every chapter kind of thing. I finished it. Armand did a whole bunch of new digital paintings for it, and that's how it was published. And it won an award. It won the Best Horror Award at the Independent Publishers Awards at Book Expo America that year, which blew all of our minds.
Fantastic. Brilliant stuff. Another big turning point for you, I think, was The Coldest City and Atomic Blonde.
Yes.
Tell us about that and what that meant, because many of us will know the movie and many of us will know it came from a comic book, but tell us how it originally came about.
So I've always loved Cold War spy fiction, John le Carré, big fan, all that sort of thing. And I love, there are several, at the time anyway, there were several spy comics, but not a lot. There wasn't a lot being done, and there wasn't anything that I felt quite captured that feeling of a Cold War le Carré novel. And at the time when I began writing it, firstly, the 20th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down was imminent. It had actually gone by the time the book was published. That anniversary had long passed. But when I started writing it, that anniversary was imminent. And I remember very distinctly, as I think I was 17 years old, watching the Berlin Wall come down live on TV. That was an enormous moment for all of us who remember it happening at the time. It's kind of stuck with me ever since, watching those news broadcasts. So these things kind of came together in my mind, along with, at the time, I'd been doing a lot of work, frankly, for other people. Yeah. So what most people don't realize about comics is that a lot of the stuff you write, you're writing things that other people have created. You're writing, installments of story about characters that someone else created and someone else owns. And that's fine. You know that going in, that's the deal. But nevertheless, I was kind of itching. I'd also just started working in video games, which is the same deal, where you don't own your own creations. So I was kind of itching to do something for myself, just to kind of take a few months off and do something that was purely for myself again, as I had been doing at the start of my career. And so I did. I took a summer off. I took, I think, 3 months off, cleared everything else away so that I had 3 months spare, and said, I'm going to write a John le Carré style Cold War graphic novel. And it's going to be grey and bleak and dour, and it's going to have lots of twists and turns and, and all this sort of thing. And that's exactly what I did. And it was illustrated by my friend Sam Hart, who's he's a Brit, but he lives in Brazil. And he's lived there since he was like 7 years old or something.
Wow.
But he's also a fan of that kind of, the black and white, stark, noirish Cold War spy fiction. So he was perfect. And that was the graphic novel. Of course, how I've just described it there is quite different to the film, to what you see on screen. Yeah. But that's, we can talk about this in more detail, and I've said this many times before. I was really, really happy with the screen adaptation. I was a co-producer on that project, so I had, the tiniest bit of input into it. But I was really happy with how Dave handled it and decided to kind of, his thinking was, everybody's made a black and white noir. That's what you expect, and it's a bit dull. Can we make a noir that's actually really colourful? And fast and, fast moving and kinetic and filled with action. And I think the results speak for themselves. You absolutely can. But nobody had really done that before. And that really appealed to me. I thought that was a great idea. I love things that haven't been done before. I do that myself a lot in my video games work. So yeah, I was really happy with all of that. And the story is actually not that different. The characters are essentially the same. The story is essentially the same. So it's, people look at it on its surface and see, this fast-moving, action-filled, brightly coloured film, and then they look at the graphic novel and they assume that they have nothing to do with one another. But actually, the characters and the story are very, very faithful to the graphic novel. It's just the presentation of it that isn't. And like I say, I was in favour of that, because I think if you'd taken just what was on the page and, put it faithfully on screen, honestly, I think even I might have got a bit bored. That's not what you want in a film, Graphic novel, sure, but it's not what you want when you're watching, moving images.
Very good stuff. And then you moved on to the Bridget Sharp spy thriller. She's this elite MI6 hacker. Tell us about Bridget and how she came about, and how this kind of moved from comics into books, because books, you are the author. You do own all this stuff yourself. It is all your thing. Was that a very conscious decision again for you?
Partly, yeah. Like I say, in the comics and graphic novels, it's kind of split, because all of my original graphic novels I do own. Those are my creations and I own the IP. But yeah, all my serialized comics work for people like Marvel and stuff. Obviously, don't own any of that. Whereas books, like you say, it's the ownership is always with the author. Why did I write? So, bearing in mind when this is happening, Atomic Blonde has been filmed and is about to go into post-production. What should I write next? And bearing in mind that my literary agent, who deals with some of my graphic novels work here in the UK, had been sort of on at me for a while to write another novel. What should I write that people might expect from me next? And so naturally I thought, well, another spy novel. For once in my life, let's do the sensible thing. Let's actually do what people want from me, because I have a habit of not doing that, and flitting between genres and formats and stuff unexpectedly. But no, this time I thought, let's do what people actually expect from me and write a spy thriller. And so that's what I did. But because this is me, the way I wanted to do it was, yes, with a female lead character, which is unusual in spy novels. She is a member of like a subculture as well, sort of goth and heavy metal subculture, which most spies certainly aren't, and most readers probably aren't familiar with. But I, as it happens, am very familiar with, so I could use that and make it cyber espionage, because obviously Atomic Blonde, Cold War, historical, I didn't want to do that again. Yeah. So instead I decided to, let's set this one in the modern day and use computers and the cyber espionage stuff again, which I'm kind of familiar with. And, I know a bit more about that than most, I think. I'm by no means an expert, but I know more than most, and I have friends who definitely are experts that I can call upon for help and advice. And I looked around and nobody else was doing that. There was nobody else that I could see that was doing quite that combination of things. And so I thought, well, at least it is what people kind of expect from me. It's, in the same milieu and stuff, but it's not the same as anything else that's currently on the market. It will stand out. And so that's how that came about. And then I decided to make her Anglo-French just because I love France and any excuse,
Fantastic. Now, you talked about flitting there. I mean, it is very much a writer's urge to write the thing that they want. And as you said earlier, you will read comics, you will read cozy crime, you will read all sorts of stuff. We all read different kind of novels, but there is a pressure on us, I think, to write the expected, to stick with the genre. But you're a model of writer reinvention. I was looking at your author photo for interviews that you've done about the Resident Evil games, which is moody, desaturated colors, versus the author photo for the Dog Sitter Detective, which is colorful and warm and friendly. I mean, that kind of reinvention, flitting, whatever you want to call it, that's kind of sustained your career, though, hasn't it? Would you say that?
Well, it's sustained my own interest in my career, which I think is really more important. So the photos thing is quite funny. I really like that. That moody series photo. That was actually taken by Chad Ward, the guy I mentioned earlier.
Right.
When I was in Los Angeles for Atomic Blonde, I went to see him and we did a photo session. But yes, when we sold the Dog Sitter Detective, obviously the publisher and my agent were like, it's not really a very cozy picture. Could you get a new one taken? And so I did, yes. Reinvention to me, most of the artists that I admire are people who do that. Right. Look at people like, say, David Bowie. Or an author like Neil Gaiman. These are people who, or a band, to go back to heavy metal, my favorite heavy metal band is a band called Paradise Lost, who have been going now for, good Lord, 30 years, and throughout their whole career have gone through, they've gone from death metal to gothic metal to electronica to sort of straight ahead rock, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And the reason that all of these people do this is because it keeps them interested in their own career. Brian Eno is another hero of mine, similar sort of thing. And that's how it is for me. It's, if I had stuck to doing, because Frightening Curves, we didn't really talk about the genre or so, but Frightening Curves, as you mentioned, it's a horror novel, basically. It's sort of like urban horror set in contemporary London. I could have built a career doing nothing but that. I'm sure I could have, because I've written quite a few horror video games like Dead Space and Resident Evil, as you mentioned. I have written other horror graphic novels and stuff since. I could have built a career on that, but I would have been bored, I think. I just think I would have after maybe 7, 8, 10 years of doing that thought, my God, can't I please do something else? And I am a big believer, as you mentioned, in writing what I want to write, in sort of following my own path and my own muse. All of my major successes and I genuinely mean this, every major success I have had in my career has come because I reached a point, like I said with Coldest City, Atomic Blonde, where I got to a point where I thought I need to do something for myself. I don't care if nobody else wants to read it. I don't care if the market says I shouldn't do this. I really, really need to write this story. Yeah. I need to do this for myself. And honestly, every time I've done that, it's worked out pretty well. You know, I've fortunately had quite a bit of success doing that. And that became apparent to me fairly early on as well. So I've just continued doing that throughout my career. And like I say, it's why I'm still here, still enjoying what I do. I still love sitting down to write every day. I really do. You know, not that I don't have the ups and downs that any writer does of, you know, the occasional days of sweating at the keyboard and going, oh my God, what have I done with my life? We all have that. Of course, I'm not immune to it like anybody else. But, you know, on the whole, I love sitting down to write every day. I love what I do. And I love the freedom that I have built for myself to do all these different things, because it means I am never, ever bored. I never worry that I've got myself stuck in a rut. And to be clear, I probably could also have had more commercial success if I'd stuck to a single genre. You know, a few people have mentioned that to me, and it's probably true. I mean, who knows? You know, there's no way to know for sure, but I probably could have had a more commercially successful career if I'd become known as that guy who does this one thing, you know? But like I say, I just would have got bored. I probably wouldn't actually still be doing it 20 years later, because I'd have gone, no, do you know what? I'm going to go back to magazines.
Yeah. Now, to get some level of success, as you know, writing all these comic books, writing novels, working on games, you need to be fairly organized. So you literally wrote the book on this. You wrote a book called The Organised Writer. What led you to writing that? Tell us about that book and the biggest lessons learned from that.
Popular demand. I am quite happy to be able to say genuinely it was popular demand. So I have always been a fairly sort of organized person. You know, my partner always takes the mickey out of me for being the person who writes the lists. You know, I am the man who makes the lists. And I've always been that guy. It's just my nature. When I worked in magazines, when I was working in magazine editorial, I was the guy who, you know, had things like the master spreadsheet of the page layouts and, you know, sort of made sure that we kept on track on the art side anyway of all the scheduling and pre-press and that kind of thing. I was very good at keeping on top of that sort of stuff. When I went freelance, I thought, oh, well, I won't have to worry about that anymore. All I have to do is write my words, send off a script, send off an invoice. Hey, presto, money turns up in my bank account. Brilliant. I won't have to do any of that sort of stuff. And, you know, you can see where the pride goeth before a fall is coming here. I realized within a few years that just simply wasn't the case. And what really did it for me was that I missed a deadline. And coming from the world of magazines, where deadlines are absolutely sacrosanct. Like, you cannot miss a deadline because the press is going to roll. That was a real wake-up call for me. That was a real shock. I had never missed a deadline before in my life. And so that encouraged me to take a look at what I was doing, get myself organized. And so what I did was I scoured around online looking for advice for how writers could get organized, looking for sort of productivity tips, as we call them these days. I'm not even sure that was a term we used back then, because this would have been like 2005, 2006 I'm talking about. And found some, and I found particularly Getting Things Done, which is the famous productivity book from America. And I read that cover to cover, and I thought, well, there's some good stuff in here, but there's a lot of it that is clearly aimed at middle managers, and maybe even CEOs, but not at writers. You know, it's aimed at people who are on the move, who manage other people, whose day is filled with interruptions, and how to deal with that. And that's obviously not the life of a writer. So I just started to make my own, and I took a few principles from Getting Things Done. I acknowledge that, and I always have. But I largely just built my own version of that kind of system that allowed me to, work on many different projects at once, which is a necessity to making a living when you're writing comics in particular. Every comics writer is working on multiple projects at once. That's just how it works. Meet my deadlines, maintain the quality, and also, maintain my quality of life, lower my stress levels, that sort of thing. And it took, a year or two to kind of build that system up, but it worked. I realized, actually, I've got something here. It works. And so I wrote a post, not even a blog post, because I don't have a blog, but I wrote a post that I stuck up on my website called The Organised Writer. And I promoted it around to a few friends, I think social media was just starting to take off by that time. Right. So I posted it on, online. And I expected that a few of my friends would read it, a few fellow authors, that sort of thing. But actually, within 6 months, 500,000 people looked at that page. Wow. And I thought, oh, wow, okay, there's clearly a lot more disorganized writers out there than I realized, a lot more people in the same boat. But then I didn't really think much else of it. I just left it there, and I was glad that it was helping people, And then over the next few years, quite a few friends of mine, fellow writers, a couple of publishers said, you should turn that into a book. Why don't you expand that? Because they'd say like, you mention this, but you don't mention this. And I'd say, that's because I do this bit as well, but I didn't put that in the article. And so, people would say, well, you should expand on this and turn it into a book. And ironically, I was so busy that I didn't have time to do that for many years. But then I think it was after I'd written the second Brigitte Sharp book, I thought, actually, I could do this. I think the time is right, and I think I have the time to do it. And so I kind of delayed. No, that was it. I was about to write the second Brigitte Sharp book. I delayed writing that by about 3 months in order to write The Organised Writer, and luckily my agent did not have a fit at me, and I told her that I was going to do that. And so just expanded the whole thing into a book, and luckily, we found a wonderful publisher in Bloomsbury who, of course, published the Writer's and Artist Yearbook, so they were a natural home for a book like this. And it's gone on to be quite popular. I hear from a lot of people who have read that book and tell me that it's genuinely helped them take control of their calendar or their schedule, or they've started using job sheets to track the stages of a project, that sort of thing. Right. I make it quite clear in the book that you can follow the whole thing if you want to, but if you have aspects of your work that's fine, and you just need help with one particular thing, like you say your calendar, or keep juggling multiple projects, then just take that bit of the book and use that by itself. That's fine. You don't have to use the whole thing. And I hear from so many people who've done that, and as I say, I've found it really useful and helpful to them. That it's really gratifying to know that there are people that I've been able to help get more organized and produce better work. And this is the thing, it's not organization for its own sake. The end goal is to maintain your quality and produce better work because you are more relaxed, more confident, more able to immerse yourself in your work creatively without worrying about everything else that's going on in the outside world. And that's naturally going to produce better work for you. So it's wonderful.
Gonna order a copy as soon as we stop talking. Okay, let's talk about one thing that you did during lockdown, which I was fascinated by. You wrote and directed a short movie called Crossover Point, which is on YouTube, folks, and you can go and check it out. Do check it out, because people ask me about writing screenplays, and I say to them, the best thing you can do is write and direct a 5-minute movie, because you'll see it go from script to production to the edit, and you learn so much about writing. Apart from the lockdown, was this something that you'd always wanted to do? What prompted that, and is it going to lead to more screenwriting and more filmmaking?
Well, it wasn't actually. You're right, and I give people the same advice, but actually Crossover Point was not my first screenplay. In the wake of Atomic Blonde, it's fine because it's not public. It's not sort of, it's not been produced or announced. But in the wake of Atomic Blonde, I pitched and sold a screenplay adapting another of my graphic novels, right? Which I then wrote in 2018, I think, started 2018, something like that. And that's. It's gone into development hell. Who knows whether it will ever be produced?
I got a few of those.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it goes. And I've written spec teleplays and stuff as well. And I've been in talks to write other screenplays. This is the life of a working writer. Is you always have a million projects that might happen at some point. But yeah, so Crossover Point, as I say, was not the first screenplay I'd written, but during lockdown, and this, again, it's such a cliche, but it's absolutely true. I woke up one morning and I was just lying in bed and I thought, well, obviously nobody can make a film during lockdown. But what if they had to? What if you had to make a film during lockdown? How would you do it, and what sort of story would it be? And within, again, massive cliche, within 10 minutes, I had pretty much the whole thing just in my head. And I immediately got up, brushed my teeth, did the essentials, but then ran into my room and furiously typed out. And within a day, I had this script. Wow. It's the sort of thing that, it's like I say, it's such a cliche. It's the sort of thing that you hear people talk about and you think, oh, that's not real, but it really did happen. I mean, it's only happened that once and it'll probably never happen again, but it did happen that one time. And so, but the other thing is, you're in lockdown, so it's difficult to sort of get hold of people. And also, as people have probably guessed by now from what we've been talking about, I'm a fairly hands-on guy. I'm a fairly DIY kind of guy. I like being the guy in control. I like doing a lot of things myself just in order to make sure that they get done the way I want them. Delegation is not a strong suit of mine. I'll happily confess to that. I'm getting better at it because I have run writers' rooms and stuff for games now as well. So I'm getting better at it. I've had to get better at it, but still. So I recruited a couple of friends who are actors, part-time jobbing actors, that sort of thing, that I knew anyway, one of whom I'd met through the comics community many years ago, Casey McKinnon, when she was producing a show about comics, and Moises Chuyan, who is a fellow podcaster. I knew him through podcasting, but I knew that they were also both actors. And so I asked them if they would be willing to do it. They said yes, we made it. You mentioned that it's an education. For me, it was doubly so because, again, that DIY spirit, I wrote it, I directed it, I edited it. I did the sound design for it. I did the sound editing for it. I basically did everything that wasn't the acting on that film. So it really was an education, but it was a great one. It was a fun time. It was hard. That's the thing that you don't realize until you make a short film. You cannot appreciate how much hard work is involved. I mean, this is a 7 or 8 minute film. You'd think it'd be no work at all. My goodness, there's so much work. But also, loads and loads of fun.
Brilliant. And a Moby song at the end as well.
Oh, I don't know Moby or anything. We're not best buds, Moby, bless him, has a library online that is available for independent filmmakers to use his music. Yeah. No, it's like, I think it's called mobysounds.com or so. I don't know. Look it up. You'll find it. But yeah, you have to sign a license and stuff. Yeah. But it's basically it's a free license that promises you won't try and monetize the video, and you can't get anything off Play. Everything on Play is like, no, you can't have anything off that.
It's been done.
Yeah. But loads of his other music is just there available as long as you comply with the terms of the license. It's incredible. It's such a generous thing for him to do. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, look, this has been absolutely fantastic. Now, Dog Sitter Detective is not a standalone. There's another one coming, Death in Little Venice. It's coming next year, 2024. More adventures from Gwinny. Can you tell us about anything about the dog in that one, the breed of dog, or is this all top secret? Is this all undercover?
It's not top secret. It's in the blurb. In fact, if you go and look at the website, you'll see there's a blurb for Death in Little Venice. It's a border collie.
Ah, brilliant.
So in Death in Little Venice, Gwinny is dog sitting for an aging rock singer who is going off to do a concert in Dublin over a bank holiday weekend, and he hires Gwinny to come and look after his border collie on his houseboat in Little Venice,
right?
While he goes off to do this gig. But just as Gwinny settles in with the dog and starts looking after it, and a carnival begins over the bank holiday weekend, the singer's body turns up. It turns out that actually he never made it out of the country, and now Gwinny has to try and solve his murder.
Brilliant. Can't wait. But until then, folks, The Dog Sitter Detective is out now. Grab a copy. And there's hundreds of comics. Amazing writing from Antony. Antony, it's been a real joy speaking to you today. Thank you so much, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been great fun.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Wow, it's we're getting a stack of incredibly multi-talented authors who've got like so many interests in different areas, and most inspiringly, are making a success of it. Because we've heard this over and over again, haven't we, Mark, of like creative authors. We keep getting new ideas. I mean, I know it's my biggest curse. I mean, you've worked in many different genres. You're a screenwriter and an author. There's tons of different things that we love to do. But Antony's really, really nailing it, isn't he?
I think he is. And I think, I mean, to be honest, if you're going to be a creative person, you need to be interested in the world around you. You need to be interested in people, in different genres and different ways of storytelling. You know, you can stick with one thing, or you can, dip a toe into a bit of everything. But I think if you are going to be a writer, you need to be interested in the world and the people in it, because those are your readers, essentially. That's who you've got to appeal to. Those are the stories that we tell. And it's how you develop your voice as well, I think. So, I was fascinated by the idea that, whatever the genre, he often writes a mystery. And it got me thinking that, is mystery at the heart of all storytelling, whatever the genre you write? And I think there's something in that. I think there is always some kind of riddle at the center of a story, even if it's something as simple as what happens next. Will they fall in love? Will they solve the crime? Will they finish the quest? Whatever the genre is, there is a kind of, little mystery at the heart of it. And actually, I think, because we were talking about this in craft coaching last week, I mean, the ultimate mystery at the heart of every story is, who is this person, your protagonist? Who are they? What are they about? What are we going to like them? We're going to be disgusted by them. We're going to be fascinated with them. Who are they? What's their thing? That's the mystery at the heart of all storytelling. So I think once you start thinking of it like that, it sort of opens it up a bit for you.
I like that because we get a little bit too boxed in with genre. If we're writing, we pick our place, if you like, and we go, right, I'm going to do romance, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But you're right, mystery really at the end of the day is just about continually keeping the reader on the hook, because they're going to find something new out, and that's whether it's the unraveling of the characters, mission, theme, story, backstory. Because if there's no mystery, then I mean, that's what in some ways that's what makes life so fascinating, isn't it? Like I just see life every single day as one massive mystery, and it keeps me fascinated by what's going on, because we don't have the answers. We never will have the answers. So
it's 42. I don't know if you've that's the answer. Yeah.
Well, interestingly, 42, and this idea of getting past 40 and it all being done.
Oh, that's a great segue, Mr. D. I love that.
What do you reckon? Is there something in that? Is there something between those 2 years? I mean, we've passed 40. I know there's a lot of people listening to this podcast who might be coming up to that age. There's a lot of people that are past that age. But what do you think? Are you over the hill? Because there wasn't no birthday cards wasn't the 40th birthday? It had the cards going over the hill. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's probably not that anymore. It's probably 50 or 60 now, but
I mean, I guess it's all a matter of perspective. What was that show and the film Boom Boom Tick with Andrew Garfield about the Broadway writer who wanted to get a show on Broadway by the time he was 30, and he died before it happened, but his show, because he wrote Rent, and I've forgotten his name, forgive me, someone out there.
Oh, I remember that, yes.
But of course, 30 is a big turning point for a lot of people, and I struggled with 30. I was like, 30, I haven't done half the things I want to get.
Yeah,
I said to my wife, I haven't got anything done that I want to get done. She said, well, you're happily married to 2 kids. And I was like, apart from that. Because I remember Harrison Ford did Star Wars when he was 35, and I was still acting at that age. I was saying, I'm not going to get Star Wars by the time I'm 35. This is a disaster. And weirdly, it's around about that time that I started writing and doing writing seriously. And it's 10 years ago when I was 40 that we were filming Robot Overlords. And there, and again, long-time listeners will have heard me say this a few times, but I was with our mutual friend, Jeremy Mason, when we were shooting Pickups at Pinewood, and we're standing on a soundstage at Pinewood Studios. And me and him used to write sketches after school, and he's gone on to be a filmmaker and I've gone on to be a writer. And we were both standing together, sort of nudging each other, going, God, what would our teenage selves say about the pair of us being on a soundstage at Pinewood? And then I said, they'd be going, what took you so bloody long? Because, so 40, I guess, was a key age. But this is the thing. I think, as much as it's fun being young and vibrant, I'm 50. I still feel like I'm just getting started.
Totally.
I've still got so much more that I want to do.
Much life in us. Yeah. Do you know where you see it at its very worst, Mark? At its complete worst. Mm-hmm. I was coaching ready for this, a 19-year-old musician who uttered these words to me. I don't even have to tell you, do I?
No, they're going to say I'm past
exactly
it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And do you know why? It was because it was when Billie Eilish, or Eilish, I don't know how you pronounce her name. Great artist, but she was like 16 or something at the time, and she'd just broken like massively. And so from a 19-year-old perspective, she'd missed the boat because there was this 16-year-old who happened to be like a million-selling artist winning Grammys, and that meant that she'd missed the boat. So my perception on all of this, and it's always perspective, absolutely 100%. It's all made up in our funny little imaginations that we have, and writers have great ones, all right? So we're really good at this. Is that you look at your favourite author, and you look at when they had their first major success, and you then look at their age, and then you look at your age, and you go, oh, well, I'm done then, I'm past it. That's what it is. Yeah. Whereas I like to take the example of Louise Hay, who started a publishing company in her late 60s. Yeah. Started to learn to ballroom dance in her 80s. My mum is a great example. She joined a choir. She'd never thought she was a singer, and she joined a choir in her 60s and absolutely loves it. It's like the best thing she's ever done. And it's like there's you can write. We have people in the academy who are retired who are writing their first book. It's absolutely brilliant. So well, if you're in that place, use it as fuel to the fire, I'd say. Like if you see your favorite authors already written 10 books, before you've started your first one, use it as fuel to the fire, but don't let it stop you. You can only run your own race.
It's your story. And the other thing is, if you are of a certain age, of a certain vintage, you've got all that life experience behind you, which a 19-year-old won't have. You are going to have so much more that you can draw on. That well is going to be so much deeper and richer. So no, I think. There is. Let's not. There is ageism. It is it's weirdly, I've encountered it, and it's kind of weird because I feel young, and there are people who will tell, oh no, you're too old. I have encountered it already. Bloody hell! But you have to get over that. I remember being young and people dismissing me because I was too young. I think you're always going to come up against things. It's
like the Eddie Izzard pear sketch, isn't it? Do you know that sketch about the pears that sit in the bowl? And he says pears are the worst fruit in the world because they sit there and they're like, and they're rock solid, and they're like, you can't eat this yet, can't eat this yet. And then they look around and like, right now, ripen. And then they're like, you can't eat them
soft,
right? And it's almost like there's that. So the thing about book writing, which I love, and I think it's quite unique maybe to writing, is age doesn't matter. There are a lot of things if you want to become a premier, when Michael Owen played for Liverpool at 16 and I was in my 20s, I had that, okay, maybe I'm not going to make the Premier League, right? and you kind of know, your body starts to ache a little bit. Steven Gerrard's finished in his mid 30s, for goodness sake. So there are certain careers or pursuits that you can do that are dictated by age, health, beauty, unfortunately, in many cases. But you know what? There is a person who's 100 who's written a book. It's the value of the story, and like you say, age. I think books and the value of it matures with age. I think the ultimate mantra for all this, Mark, is like, if you're still breathing, it's not too late. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. You can be old and ugly and write a novel. I'm testament to that.
I think it's brilliant. Well, I think we should celebrate it, because there's not many creative pursuits where you get to do it for the rest of your life. There's no retiring from writing. You don't have to take the golden handcuffs or the watch.
Some people have, but I have no intention. I remember having a conversation with a financial advisor about retirement and pensions, and I'm 50. Technically I should be retiring in about 15, 16 years or whatever it is, but no way, unless, it's something terrible happens, but I will keep going until I drop.
My wonderful ex-neighbour, who I love to death, he passed away a few years ago. He was in his 90s, but he was in the Welsh Guard. And he used to tell me, he used to shout over the fence as he handed me a glass of red wine. He was that kind of guy, just a glass of red wine would appear over the fence. He'd say, "Mark, I got my royalty check from the PRS today." And I'm like, "Royalty check?
Oh, really?
What's all that about?" He said, I played in the Royal Guard back in 1960. And he basically was on like some LP of the Royal Guard playing, and he was still getting a royalty check every 3 months in his 90s. So as a writer, you put any creative work out there into the world, and you will, it might buy you a cup of tea, or it might buy you a lot more than a cup of tea. But the point is that beyond your death, that money's going to keep coming in. So I think it's great. Just create, put it out there, let it flow back to you. Right? It's all good. It's all good, folks. The other thing that Antony mentioned, which is really interesting, which is kind of linked to success and being a bit too humble, is this idea of right time and right place, right time.
Yeah, he said that a couple of times, didn't he? And I think very often we take these narratives and we replay them in our heads, and it's like, oh, wasn't I lucky to be there? But you look at how hard Antony has worked, and it's the old Mark Twain thing, the harder I work, the luckier I get. He has worked very, very hard, and he wouldn't have been in that place all that time unless he was working that hard. So I think you've got to have skin in the game. You've got to have skin in the game to make these things happen. And that means showing up and writing and failing, and then failing a bit less, and then eventually something comes along that actually works, and because of that you are in the right place and the right time when it happens. The things that have happened to me, again, I can look back and go, God, I was lucky I made that decision, and I was lucky that I made that decision, and I'm really lucky I met that person. But none of those things happen unless I'm kind of pushing things forward myself. It's not like I sat at home one day and someone said, "Do you want to write a movie about robots?" It's you got to have skin in the game. You got to put yourself out there, which is scary, because it can go horribly, horribly wrong, and there's rejection and failure and disaster and things not working and all that jazz. But I think the longer you play, Abercrombie said it brilliantly. What was it? He said, the longer you dance naked in the rain, the more likely you are to be struck by lightning. So
yeah.
Very much
I think, and
that.
I was looking at some quotes yesterday for the book I'm working on, and came across this quote by Bruce Lee about being like water, and it was this whole idea of water never tries to flow through something, it always flows around it. And so all of those rocks will be in our pathway. It's part of it. Like, honestly, who would expect to wake up one day and for not a single thing to go not to plan or to go wrong? Like, it happens every single day for everyone. Like today I was working on audio problems with the microphone for the podcast. Like, okay, we've not even started the day and there's an audio problem. So it's like, think about, even if it's just somebody getting in your way when you're rushing somewhere because you're late for whatever it is, it's like, let's just accept that this is how life is. And the same is true when you're writing a book. If you started writing a book and it was the simplest thing in the world, I could guarantee you it'd be the crappiest book ever. Like, no one would be interested. If there's no conflict in the journey of writing a book, there'll be no conflict in the story. In fact, if there's no conflict in our life, we probably wouldn't write about conflict in our books, which is the thing which gets everyone sucked into it. So think of it as training for your characters. Like anything that happens, what was it? Yeah. But again, we always go back to Bryan Cranston, no matter how bad something happens in your life, it'll make a good story down the road.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
It's such a great truism, isn't it? So I think it's really important for people to
the mill.
Yeah, enjoy it. Like, actually start. This is the enlightened approach. It's like you get to a point where the thing that goes wrong in your day, you kind of like welcome, and you're like, okay, here you are, great. And you don't react to it. You don't. Of course, there's someone going to be slower than you in front of you when you're rushing to get somewhere. It's because it always happens, right? It's like just accept it, laugh at it, and then work out how you can use it in your story if you need to.
Exactly.
It's a million and one things you can do with it. But yeah, it's really interesting. Well, folks, listen, we've got a lot more that we want to talk about in the extended edition of this podcast. And if you are a patron or you are an Academy member, you already have access to these. If you would love to get access, then listen to what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about what Antony talked about called flitting. Mark talked about writer reinvention, about how you can sustain your own interest in your writing, and how it can turn out for the best. We're also going to talk about this idea of, should you be focusing on one thing, or should you be following your heart if you want to look at lots of different things, if you've kind of got that Renaissance man kind of about you that wants to try lots of different things. We're also going to talk a little bit of, Mark's going to talk about how to make a short movie. I'm looking forward to this. This is brilliant. How to make, so if you're interested in that, because again, that's so relevant to writing as well. We've got all of that waiting for you in this week's extended edition of the podcast. So pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Or if you're interested in joining the Academy, the window is now open, folks, for a beginning of September start. And you have a few weeks to go and check that out for the early birds. And then I think it's mid-August is the deadline for that. So no, pop along to that. But thanks so much, folks. And we'll see you on the other side. So in the extended, Mark, we talked about this idea of being organised and project management. And I did say that there is one tool that I've discovered online, which I've started using as a kind of ex-project manager, some simplified way of keeping track of everything, because it'd be brilliant for like planning stories as well. And I'm not going to reveal it on the podcast, folks, because I'm going to say go over to the newsletter and I will put it in the next week's edition of the newsletter. So go to bestsellerexperiment.com/newsletter, or just go to the main website, click on the newsletter tab, put in your email address and join our weekly update of the podcast. And I'll be starting to drop quite a few cool little handy tips for writing in that newsletter as well. So make sure you get onto that as soon as possible. So Mark, what celebrations and wins do we have this week?
So much good news. So much good news. Where do I start? Let's start with Alex over on the Academy. So Alex, regular at my surgeries and craft coaching. I'm sure he's on your life coaching as well, Mrs. Alex Waite, just absolute brilliant,
wonderful
brilliant guy. Yeah, and he says, I've got a solid win with my story. I've had 2 solid breakthroughs in the last week, and he's making a public declaration. And breakthrough number 1, he's tried many different ways of tackling. He's writing a pretty epic fantasy story, and he found it frustrating the words haven't come as easily because he writes scripts. He's worked in animation. He's a really good screenwriter. And he says, the obvious solution in retrospect is to treat my story like a script. I've blocked out the chapters like I would scenes in a film. Everything's become a lot easier. Been averaging 800 plus words a day per sentence. Now, talk about being organized. We talked about that. Alex is taking, something that he's familiar with and repurposing it for novel writing, which is great. Breakthrough 2, he was having trouble with his antagonist, and he felt the motivations were a bit thin and they didn't really feel alive. But he was listening to a history podcast about a war during the Middle Ages, and he found a person to base his character on and the events surrounding him. And after that, everything else fell into place, even some ideas for the next book. So, still from history, folks. It works. I do it all the time. So Alex has a public declaration. He's now 49,000 words in. His goal is to finish another 100,000 by the end of the year for the first draft. So he's put the 12th of December, which has a nice feel to it. That is in the diary, Alex. I will be in touch. So good luck with that.
Do you know what the coolest thing about having Alex in the Academy is? We get to hang out with a guy who's worked on, he was the lead character animator in Happy Feet.
I know.
He works on Peter Rabbit, The Woodleys, Legends of the Guardian, George of the Jungle. Like, these are the kind of cool people you get to hang out with and chat with in the Academy. So yeah, brilliant. We're really, really happy for you, Alex.
Also on the Academy, Anne Woodward. After 70 plus rejections, I'm going to say that again, 70 plus rejections from agents and publishers, I took Mr. Stay's advice. Oh dear, where's this going? I took Mr. Stay's advice and gave my novel a new name. Last week, I received my first full manuscript request from a publisher. Thank you, Mr. Stay. Brilliant. Now, let's just say, Anne, I don't know if the title, I think it's your writing, Anne. I think that's what got you the first manuscript request. The title, I think it's your writing. I think the quality. Anne is brilliant. Again, regular, all the surgeries, just superb. So congrats on that, Anne. Full manuscript request. Who knows? It might be, okay, sorry, it's not for us. Or it could be, this is where it all begins. We don't know. But either way, that's an incredible achievement and huge congrats on that.
It's massive, Anne. And it's just so inspiring because it's about persistency. Yeah. It doesn't matter how many rejections you've had. I mean, 70 rejections, and the fact you've kept going through all of that is testament to your determination to make this happen and to keep going until someone picks it up. And I think for me, the title, changing the title is a bit like with the stories we hear about how when people change the book cover, it freshens things up. It maybe gives you a new sense of kind of enthusiasm over it as well. And so, yeah, I think brilliant. Well done.
Right. This is a biggie. This is amazing. Right. Susie Edge, who's been on the podcast, and we know she's coming back on again. She did a deep dive on TikTok. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can check it out, folks. This is one of the rewards you get as a Patreon supporter or an academic. You get access to these brilliant deep dives. And they're not just from any old Tom, Dick or Harry. They're from people who know what they're on about, because Susie Edge has been shortlisted in the TikTok Book Awards in the category of Book Talk Author of the Year.
Shortlisted. Unbelievable.
That's amazing. She's so this is fantastic. This is just brilliant. So Susie, we've got everything crossed for you. Wow. Susie's TikToks are amazing. I'm sure you've come across them if you're on TikTok. They're just brilliant.
What would happen? I mean, and how big's this shortlist? Are any ideas, Mark?
I don't think it's very big at all.
Well, because we're talking, I mean, TikTok. I mean, that massive, if you, well, to be honest, it's like getting nominated for an Oscar, isn't it? It's almost like, great if you win, but man, if you get a nomination, that's huge. So Susie, we have everything crossed for you, and folks, just watch this space. It's unbelievable. Brilliant.
Fantastic. Now, 200 words a day. This is our free challenge to everyone. Now, I know there are some people who can't write every day, find it difficult to write every day. But, I think if you want to build a habit, just writing 200 words a day, 15 minutes, 20 minutes in any little space of time. I do it every day. It helps create a writing habit. And there's a lovely blog from Diane Wordsworth on how the 200 words a day challenge helped her finish her book. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that. Diane is one of those people who's tweeting every day with us. And also Jenny Roman, who is at Slightly Turquoise on Twitter. She says, woohoo, I've completed 200 days of the 200 words a day challenge without missing a day. Go me, go you. So Jenny, Diane, this is it. It's building that habit, getting into the habit, and it increases your productivity. It's just fantastic. So congrats for both of you. This is absolutely brilliant.
Well done.
Absolutely brilliant. Karen Story, another regular in the Academy who I mean, we've mentioned her in her short story competitions before and how she just keeps knocking it out of the park. And she put a post up in the wins section in the Academy. She said, okay, this is getting embarrassing now, because how many short story competitions the listings can I keep posting here without sounding like I'm making this up? And she says, this one is a competition she can't name yet. First prize is £1,000. But honestly, I'll just be happy if it gets onto the shortlist, as that's another published anthology that a story of mine will be included in. And Mr. D is absolutely right about keeping spreadsheets for everything. There we go. We talked about organising. She says, I've one for my short stories. Yeah, I've one for my short stories which states when I've submitted, which story, and when the long list comes out. It's amazing how not all competitions email you when you've made a listing. Can you believe that? I've just been looking at my spreadsheet and saw the competition long list was due out early July, figured I wasn't on it, then remembered it happened before there was a competition that didn't email their long listers. And there it was, the story I submitted to them on the long list. So that's just fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. Congrats, Karen. Huge.
Well done, Karen. And if you miss the extended, Mark and I talk about the one spreadsheet. It's like the one ring. That without that spreadsheet, we would not have been able to do or keep up with this podcast. And it's something we started before we started the podcast. And to this day, it's updated a couple of times a week. So yeah, go check out the importance of spreadsheets in your planning. It's very, very interesting.
And we talk about persistence in this game. We talk about overcoming, your fears. We talk about putting yourself out there and becoming an author. Angela C. Nurse, who big supporter in the BXP group. She writes amazing crime novels. Do check her out. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check out her writing. Well, she's doing an online event with the UK Crime Book Club on August 13th at 1 p.m. She's going to be talking about private investigator fiction with Wendy Jones, James Murphy. Angela Nurse is on there. Do check that out. She's going to be absolutely brilliant. She's been, again, Angela, I think she's just started a TikTok channel as well. I think inspired maybe by Susie. This is people overcoming, gosh, do I need to be on social media? Do I need to be that person? But overcoming it, putting themselves out there and sort of reaping the rewards. This is all good stuff.
Well done to everyone. And thank you to everyone who's sharing your wins and declaring your dreams. Do keep doing them. Keep sending them to us. Pop along to, all the different socials, Mark, aren't there? Is a good way of getting in contact with us.
Yeah, drop us a line on Facebook with Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is @BestsellerXP. We are also @BestsellerXP on Threads. Yes, we're on there.
We're on Threads. We're one of the few million.
I'm not sure if it's worth it yet. But anyway, we'll see. We're on there. Drop us a line.
Great.
And just remember, I need to log in, actually. I haven't checked all day. But also, if you go to bestsellerexperiment.com, there's a contact tab there where you can drop us a line.
Brilliant. And if you would like to do the 200-word challenge, simply go to 200wordchallenge.com. It's that simple. Sign up, pop your email address in, and you will be off and running. And if you would like to join Mark and I becoming your mentors and coaches in the Bestseller Academy, if you'd like to join our September intake, then pop along now, academy.bestsellerexperiment.com, put your application in, and you'll hear back from us very, very soon. So Mark, have a great, great week. We hope that you all are inspired today to get organised, to try all those different things out that you've always wanted to try, and
make a movie.
Make a movie. Absolutely. Brilliant. So have a great writing week, everyone. Until next week, it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye.